So a couple years ago, I was watching some TV, minding my own business, when a commercial for Grub TurboTax came on. It was around the time of tax season, so I did my best to ignore it, but it had this one song in the background that hooked me the second I heard it. It sounded like a sci-fi movie from the 70s. It was all ominous and weird, but also bubbly.
See if not taxes makes you laugh.
So I got my phone out, Shazammed it as fast as humanly possible, and I was greeted with a song called Plantasia. This song fascinated the hell out of me. It sounded vintage, but weirdly contemporary too. Like, I feel I've heard a lot of stuff that was inspired by its sound, but now that I was hearing the actual thing, it blew my mind. Suffice to say, I needed more, so I did some digging and found the whole package, Mother Earth's Plantasia. An album that originally wasn't designed for people like you and me, but instead houseplants. It claimed that the song's frequencies would help them grow and develop faster. So you know, with a claim like that, it's gotta have a good story. That's why today we're gonna take a look at Plantasia, its history, and most importantly, the person responsible for it, Mort Garson. Mort was born July 2nd, 1924, and from an early age he was fascinated by music. He would literally come up with whole-ass songs and melodies in front of people and sing it to them. He eventually went to Juilliard but couldn't decide if he wanted to write classical. Like, he had the ability to, he just didn't really feel like it, which that's like the biggest flex of all time. Music was put on hold for a bit when he got drafted in World War II, but the second it was over, he went right back to it, doing film soundtracks and working as a session musician. Eventually, he got into pop music, and chances are, even if you don't know Mort Garson, you've still probably heard his work. He worked on albums with Mel Torme, Joni Somers, and composed Our Day Will Come by Ruby and the Romantics, which also has been covered by everyone under the sun, James Brown, Amy Winehouse. So yeah, a lot of us are probably in like the splash zone of Mort Garson. Columbia Records hired him to work on Doris Day's last two albums, which him and his family had to move from New York to Los Angeles to do. And that may seem like a pretty big decision for writing some music, but Mort took music extremely seriously. It was all or nothing with this guy. Back in his conducting days, the dude could literally pick someone out who was playing wrong by just the look on their face. And this was especially the case with writing albums.
He was so involved. First of all, he was no longer a father or a husband. He was just completely consumed with what was in front of him.
After finishing the albums, Mort stepped away from pop music, feeling he was getting further away from his true artistic self. But this would change when he met Robert Moog at an audio engineering convention in 1967. If that name isn't familiar, he was the founder of Moog Music and built the first commercially sold synthesizer. These things were groundbreaking in electronic music, as they created sound through voltage-controlled oscillators, amplifiers, and noise generators. Mort was so impressed with Moog synthesizers, he spent $50,000 on the first commercially made Moog 3C, which he'd use in almost everything for the next chunk of his career. And because no one had ever heard anything like the Moog until then, Mort got to do some pretty crazy shit with it. Like, how about doing the music for the Apollo 11 broadcast?
The big deal for my family was that my dad's music was playing in the background, and that he had arranged this, and that he had used the Moog synthesizer, which was perfect for that because that was an out-of-this-world experience.
He also used it on some studio albums, 1967's Zodiac Cosmic Sounds, which was also groundbreaking because it was the first album ever to use both a synthesizer and orchestra together, 1968's Wazir of Is, which was made in collaboration with Jack Wilson, the lyricist from Zodiac, two occult-like albums, Black Mass Lucifer and The Unexplained, and finally a 12-album collection that resembled each zodiac sign, which by the way, Billboard considered the entire thing as one whole album, and as a result, its collective sales actually got it to chart at 147 for 15 weeks. It's better than I'm doing. I could talk about Mort's wacky music shit all day, but we should probably start talking about those things called plants. Let's shift gears to the year 1973, when a book called The Secret Life of Plants by Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird came out. The book claims plants are not only alive and have emotions, but communicate telepathically, can identify pain in other plants, carry ancient wisdom in their cells, and most of all, love music. If you could imagine, this book became pretty infamous in the world of botany. There's even a pretty scathing review of it in the New York Times when it came out. Still, the book gained a massive following. It got on tons of bestseller lists and was even made into a documentary with music by Stevie Wonder. This began a huge phenomenon for plant music, as around the time another book called Music and Plants by Dorothy Redelac came out. This one claims the growth of a plant changes depending on what music you play it. For example, if you played something soothing like classical or jazz, the plant would grow more, and then playing something loud like Hendrix or Zeppelin made it grow less. I'm sure its reputation is as questionable, but after this, tons of artists made music specifically catered to plants. You got Plant Music by Baroque Bouquet from 1975, that's a nice combo with jazz and classical, and A Chant for Your Plants by Anne Chase, which is an acoustic rendition of Eric Satie's Gymnopédie No. 1, that sad classical song that sounds like Minecraft music. But the most popular out of all these was of course Plantasia. The album was conceived by MORT along with Joel and Lynn Rapp, owners of Mother Earth Plant Boutique in LA. Before this, Joel was a TV writer but got burnt out and shifted his focus to plants. He even wrote a best-selling book series in the 70s about him, so making music for plants seemed like the next logical step. They'd go into detail about how exactly the music affects plants, stating, "Every pitch is scientifically designed to affect the stomata, or breathing cells of your plants, opening them ever so slightly wider and allowing them to breathe ever so slightly freer, and thus growing ever so slightly better." Ever so slightly. I'm sure by now you're wondering if this actually worked. Do plants actually grow faster thanks to Plantasia? To be honest, I don't know. The effects of music or any audio has on plants is a whole other rabbit hole I don't got time for. Hell, even Joel admitted he wasn't sure if it would work, but, wouldn't hurt to try. I've linked some more videos and articles in the description that go into more detail about this, but even if Plantasia doesn't do this, which honestly it might be considered false advertising, it's at the very least a good album. Okay, so to recap, this entire thing is made with the Moog 3C. To my knowledge, there's not a single other instrument on here, and that's because this thing is insanely versatile. It fills every role and section perfectly. Melodies, rhythm, bass, it nails it on all the songs, but sometimes one will have more attention than the others, and other times one will be in the background and let the others shine. You got groovy songs like Swingin' Spathiphyllums, the drums and bass are super tasty, and the synth melody sounds like raindrops trickling down. Then you got really melodic ones like Symphony for a Spider Plant. This one builds into a soft refrain that's really pretty. It uses emptiness super well. There's a lot of mood shifts on this too, like the last two songs were bright and bubbly, the title track was dreamy and dramatic, and then you got Ode to African Violet. This one's probably my favorite track. It's dark and kind of menacing, not gonna lie. It's got these echoey synths and low bass notes that just sound like thuds. They even fit the blues in here. Baby Tears has a really nice beat that you just can't help but, slowly bop your head to. It also sounds like music you'd hear in a shop in Earthbound. In fact, a lot of tracks remind me of Nintendo games. Spathiphyllum sounds like a rest area in Kirby, Rhapsody in Green sounds like Metroid Prime, Don't Have to Walk a Begonia sounds like Mario Party, and Concerto for Philodendron is literally Zelda's Lullaby. Plantasia is insanely dynamic, tonally, instrumentally, even though again it only uses one instrument. It's insanely engaging, each song shakes it up in some way, shape, or form, and the instruments and tone accommodate for each other perfectly, either through the inclusion or exclusion of parts or sections, or how those parts or sections are even utilized. Really the only critique I got is some songs are a bit short, like they're still good in their own terms, but I feel like just a little more could have been added. Spider Plant could have been a bit longer, and the whole time I listen to Mellow Mood for Maidenhair, I'm just waiting for a drum beat to kick in, and it never does. The album itself is only 30 minutes long, so it's not the longest thing out there, but it's a very cozy listen. But yeah, with how great this album sounds, it must have been like the hottest thing ever. Like I'm sure everybody was buying this for their ficuses, right? Actually, no, it bombed. Okay, so the reason this flew under the radar was, well, two reasons. One, you only had two ways of buying it. At Mother Earth's store in LA, and allegedly with a purchase of a Simmons mattress at select Sears stores. Yeah, those were the only ways. And second was Mort's marketing. He didn't put his name on a lot of his other projects. Zodiac was self-titled, The Unexplained was Ataraxia, and Black Mass is weird because it was released as Lucifer, you know, the artist, but the Wikipedia page says it's Black Mass Lucifer by Mort Garson. Point is, his name didn't have a lot of star power, despite writing music for the moon landing. It wasn't until almost 40 years later it got the recognition it deserved. In 2019, the album was reissued by Sacred Bones Records, a record company that specializes in reprinting lost and obscure albums. Its founder, Caleb Brayton, found Plantasia when he worked at a secondhand record shop in Denver, and immediately fell in love. There's something about it that's immediately nostalgic. It takes you to this warm place in the past. It's tickling those same senses as something from your childhood. I think the people who didn't even grow up with that stuff also feel the same warm sensations of, I don't know, it's very interesting. He reached out to Mort's daughter, Day Darmit, about reissuing the album, and by then she already got a couple offers to re-release Plantasia, but rejected them all because she didn't feel they did the album justice. It was even more shocking today because she admits she doesn't even like Plantasia. In fact, neither did her mom, Mort's wife, who served as a huge inspiration because of her love of houseplants. They thought it was just a little too out there, but Day is still touched by it and agreed to the reissue, knowing Caleb felt the same way. And ever since the reissue, Plantasia's gotten quite the renaissance. You can find endless amounts of covers and tributes throughout YouTube. There was Plantasia at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, a multi-sensory experience that coincided with the reissue, and even had Mort's Moog on display. Even Mort's other projects were getting attention. A couple years later, Sacred Bones got approached by Andy Zaks, a recording collector and archivist who restored catalogs for the Talking Heads, Rod Stewart, and Echo and the Bunnymen, to name a few. Turns out Andy had a reel of Mort's music from the moon landing, so they compiled it together and made Journey to the Moon and Beyond in 2023. Sadly, Mort wouldn't get to see any of this newfound success as he died in 2008, but his legacy lives on as he played a fundamental role in the development of electronic music, so whether or not Plantasia makes your plants grow, it definitely left a mark. At least for me. Check out this painting I made of it. I love this album so much. Oh, and one more thing. If you're wondering what happened to Mort's Moog, he sold it sometime around the early 80s, and it ended up with Mark Burton for a while, an audio engineer who developed the Syndrome, and Sam, the software automatic mouth, the first text-to-speech system that ran independently on microcomputers. Mark also played a synthesizer he built by hand in an Emerson, Lake and Palmer cover band. So if anybody was qualified to own Mort's Moog, it was him. Then a few years ago, Mark sold it to Anthony Marinelli, who's played synth on tons of albums over the years, including Michael Jackson's Thriller. He's actually got his own YouTube channel and has videos talking about maintaining it and how to make certain sounds. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of this flies over my head. Like, this is a whole other level of convoluted that I haven't even dipped my toes into yet. But he did make one video about replicating the tone from Plantasia, and the most important thing to do is to add a glide effect so your notes sound like pitch shifts and kind of fade into each other. So for any aspiring synth players that want to sound like Mort, that's what you do. But yeah, that's all I got. As always, thank you very much for watching, and please listen to Plantasia, or really any of Mort's other work. This dude has one of the most expansive and colorful discographies I've ever seen, or heard. He's one of those artists you've definitely heard without realizing it. Besides all of his writing credits in the 60s, besides making the moon landing music, he's also been sampled by some pretty high-profile people, like Beck used his song Climax 1 in Devil's Haircut. Listen to that song next time you're at a social function, by the way. Shoutouts to my patrons, of course, and I'll see y'all next time when we talk about one of my top 5 favorite fictional robots of all time.